All right, welcome back to episode 2 of the revamped Lantern Sports podcast, hosted by the Lantern Sports Desk. I'm Stephen Kishpaugh, assistant sports editor. Joining me, Jacob Benge, sports editor, and then sitting to my left and right, respectively, Casey Smith, LTV producer, and Gabe Burggraf, LTV assistant producer. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here for episode 2. Before we get into the episode, just want to note a couple of things around Ohio State athletics. The men's golf team is currently 7th out of 8 teams after 2 rounds of the Frederica Cup. Junior Maxwell Moldovan and senior Jackson Chandler lead the way, shooting 5 under par. And graduate transfer Neil Shipley had the best round, shooting 67 in the second round. And in addition to that, we have the unbeaten men's soccer team hosting number 12 Butler Friday night at Jesse Owens Memorial Stadium. Ohio State has not allowed a goal in the last 309 minutes of action. Senior goalkeeper Keegan McLaughlin is the reigning Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week after posting back-to-back shutouts against Bowling Green and Wright State. And then for tomorrow night's game, star player Lawrence Wooten is going to be out with an ankle injury. So, big stuff coming out of a couple of our men's sports. But boys, you know what we're here for. First, Notre Dame last weekend. Ohio State's offense, they didn't look, as explosive as they did last year, but the defense, on the other hand, they looked outstanding, giving up only 10 points, not allowing a point in the entire second half. Jacob, you and I were watching from the press box. What did you see from Ohio State? What was your biggest takeaway from the weekend?
I think my biggest takeaway from, Ohio State's season opening game against Notre Dame was that Ohio State might be playing it safe a little bit this season. I know last season missing the playoff, not winning the Big Ten championship like Ohio State's used to, that fueled a fire in them this offseason. It prompted the coaching changes, and we saw the differences in that from the defense and, even a little bit on the offensive line with Paris Johnson moving to left tackle, his natural position, Matt Jones and Donovan Jackson there at guard. But I mentioned playing it safe in a way because, I asked Ryan Day how significant I asked him this week how significant it was that there were no turnovers, no giveaways, and really the ball was protected well. And, he said, well, he brought up the 4th and 3 punt where they were well inside Notre Dame's field positioning, and instead of opting to go for it like an Ohio State team did last season against Oregon per se, instead of going for it there on 4th down, they decided to punt. They put trust in the defense, which is a sign that Ryan Day is truly allowing Jim Knowles to be that head coach of the defense like he's saying Knowles should be. And so, luckily for Ohio State, it worked out in the Buckeyes' favor for their defense to exactly do what, was what they expected to do in the preseason was stop the opposing teams, stop the run, and things like that. So Ohio State, like you mentioned, Stephen, they may not be explosive, they may not, have looked like that in the opening game, but then, as Day and Stroud and the rest of them said this week, they're going to use the game against Arkansas State, Toledo, to tune up things and to maybe find their rhythm before really getting into conference play against Wisconsin here at the end of September.
Yeah, for sure, Jacob. That defense, they said they want to be the best defense in the country. Ryan Day set the total at top 10 defense, and then Jim Knowles. That's not enough. They want to be top 5, one of the best defenses in the country, and I think just their ability to show improvement in the run stopping game, only allowing Notre Dame to rush for less than 100 yards. I mean, you can only count on one hand probably just the number of times that they allowed opponents to rush for less than 100. There were 4 times last year opponents rushed for 200. So, I mean, just everybody know their assignment, and that's what everybody at Ohio State's defense was really trying to stress. Just Jim Knowles being such a teacher that he is. I mean, the first day we had an availability with him, he's standing at the mic and using the microphone almost as a tackling dummy to try and talk about how he wants his guys to tackle at angles and stuff like that. So, I mean, it was really sort of a bright spot for Ohio State's defense, led by Tommy Eichenberg, who named a captain, 9 tackles, 2 sacks, and 3 tackles for loss. Lathan Ransom had 7 tackles. Everything out of camp has been about Lathan Ransom. He's been able to see the forest through the trees, as Jim Knowles says it. And then Steel Chambers also there in the middle with 5 tackles as well. So they were really talking about how they're starting to get the mental side of the game, and now they're just being able to go out there and play. And I think you saw that this past Saturday.
Well, talking about seeing the forest through the trees, that one sack that Eichenberg came through, like the Red Sea just parted and he found Buckner in the backfield. It really exemplified to me what Jim Knowles and the coaching staff has been talking about in terms of velocity, flying around the field. And like Casey said, they might not have everything prepared and ready to go mentally or scheme-wise, but you could tell they were ready to be there and ready to play and ball out, give everything they had to try to get to the ball, especially in the run. You saw a couple of big plays. The first play from scrimmage, that huge 50-yard pass, they could have kind of gave up on that drive, as Ryan Day and others have said this week after the game. So the fortitude to step in and keep trying to deliver punches, even if they don't land, is what this defense seems to have that last year's just didn't.
Right. You talked about that first play. Over 1/5, over 25% of their total yards for the game came on that one play. After that, they got 199 total yards after that 54-yard completion. So, I mean, it's just you saw it too many times last year. Just big chunk plays, being able to go the length of the field. The one that just keeps replaying in my mind is Cam Rising on 4th and 2 in Utah's own territory in the Rose Bowl, and he breaks, I don't know. Dude, if I had $1 for the number of tackles he broke on that run, I wouldn't be on this podcast because I'd be living pretty in California right now. They looked really stout, and you were talking about that twist that Tommy Eichenberg ran, and that's sort of the post-snap movement that Jim Knowles' defense really wants to create and confuse some of these quarterbacks. Just not necessarily giving them the best look pre-snap. And then, I mean, Tommy Eichenberg, he was lined up on the right side of the defensive line. He twists all the way around to the left side just to get through just a wide open line and get that big sack and energize the crowd. And I think everybody that is saying, like, Ohio State's offense, they only scored 21 points. Stroud only threw for 235 yards or so, around that figure. So I think all those people will see coming in the Big Ten slate. The offense is fine. I don't have any doubts with the offense. Notre Dame, I mean, they were still ranked number 5. Everybody likes to talk about how they don't show up in big games, and I think they're 2-22 in like top 25 matchups or top 10 matchups, something along those lines. But they're just abysmal when the bright lights shine. So I mean, everybody talking about, oh, why didn't Ohio State blow out Notre Dame? They're still a top 5 team in the country, and I think you have to respect that from the Fighting Irish's standpoint.
And also, off of that, you can't take this first game as everything that's going to happen this season. The Ohio State offense is going to score a lot of points this year, and the defense is going to give up its own scores. Like, the defense is going to get scored on. It's just kind of stopping the bleeding and kind of evaluating where that fits in team-wise, what you need to get defensively to be a championship contender, a playoff contender, and a threat. Because the thing is, there were a couple big plays in this game that really kind of shifted the game as well defensively. One play, I think it was the tight end for Notre Dame, Mayer, wide open. He goes up, and he wasn't open on the catch. He made an acrobatic catch over one of the linebackers or corners. But then he starts running down the field, and he just drops the ball. You don't know what that could have been. He had a one-on-one with, I believe, a safety. So the field position game, like Jacob and Casey were talking about, Ryan Day was much more conservative in this game, and it's arguable that the defense didn't show its full bag of tricks. So down the line, there's going to be things that happen that are either whipped up in the weeks prior or whipped up on the spot. And those adjustments, coaching-wise, are going to play a big role in this season for the Buckeyes.
You know, a good point that you both have mentioned, Casey and Gabe, is that, you know, Ohio State may not have been explosive and didn't have those big plays. I wonder how much of that came from the loss of Jackson Smith and Jigba there in the first half. He gets hit pretty hard in the first quarter. His helmet comes off. I initially thought that he may have had a concussion, but, you know, it turns out he's going to have a leg injury. C.J. Stroud talked about having a hamstring injury of his own, perhaps hinting at something that Jackson has himself. You know, we were at availability Wednesday night, and Jackson walked in onto the indoor practice field at the Woody. He still had his practice gear on, helmet in hand. You know, he took a lot of passes from the Jugs machine, and he looked as if, you know, he's practicing to play on Saturday. I wrote earlier this week that, you know, Ohio State's not going to play Jackson unless he's close to or at 100%. They're not going to want to risk further injury, especially for these conference games like we're mentioning. So, I'm curious how much Ohio State's offense is perhaps going to change with having to monitor Jackson's leg injury and how much it did impact that game on Saturday against Notre Dame overall.
Yeah, you talk about Jackson Smith-Njigba's injury, and obviously it's a huge blow to the Ohio State offense given what he did last season on a team that produced 2 first-round draft picks at the wide receiver position. But Ohio State kind of, in my opinion, has an embarrassment of riches at the wide receiver position. I mean, in Smith-Njigba's absence, Emeka Egbuka, he went 9 catches, 90 yards, and a touchdown. Marvin Harrison Jr., he caught 3 touchdowns in the Rose Bowl. He went 5 catches for 56 yards. And then, probably the most talked about player of the weekend, Xavier Johnson, caught his first career touchdown pass, and then immediately after made an amazing special teams play by tackling whoever. Sorry for forgetting who was returning it, but down Notre Dame at the 13-yard line immediately after. So Ohio State, and that's not even mentioning Cade Stover, tight end. He had 3 catches, granted 14 yards, but last season the tight ends weren't very involved in the offense, but early on in the game, Stroud found Stover either 2 or 3 times. So the passing game, even without Jackson Smith-Njigba, I think will be fine because Stroud obviously is extremely talented. He's projected to be a first-round pick, is the current favorite to go number 1 overall. If just the loss of one receiver really just puts a dent in what they're able to do on offense, then it's probably not going to spell good news for Ohio State for the rest of the season.
Yeah, if Ohio State's smart, Jackson Smith-Njigba doesn't see the field till Wisconsin. Arkansas State, with all due respect, they played. They're coming off an FCS opponent win 58-3 against Grambling State. So I mean, that's that. And then you got Toledo. I mean, even though it's under the lights, who knows? Crazy things happen under the lights. But I think Ohio State's going to be fine. I think keeping Jackson Smith-Njigba on the sidelines. Ryan Day talked about how he trusts the opinions of his veteran players. That was Jackson Smith-Njigba was obviously one of those guys. He said when he went out, obviously they're going to trust the doctors first, but after that, he's going to go to the player themselves and then say, hey, are you good to go? Obviously, Jackson's going to try and lobby because he doesn't want to be on the sideline in a big game against Notre Dame like that. But I think if Ohio State's smart, they hold him out these next 2 weeks, have him 100% fresh because hamstrings are funny. Leg injuries in general are funny. I mean, you can feel fine one day, and then you go to make a cut, or, you go and plant. Who knows if he's going up for a catch, then comes down and lands awkwardly. They're real quick to re-aggravate. So I think just taking it slower than need be is a wise decision for the Buckeyes. I don't see this affecting their offense because, you still have C.J. Stroud under center as the signal caller, and then, you have the two-headed monster, Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams. Going off of that, talking about injuries and keeping guys fresh, buy Mayan Williams stock right now because, last season in the opener as well, Mayan Williams led the Buckeyes in rushing because the world didn't know who Travion Henderson was. And, after setting the freshman touchdown record a season ago, obviously everybody knows who he was or is now. Then he had 15 carries, 91 yards. Mayan Williams supported that with 14 rushes for 84 yards and that big touchdown that reminded me of Master Teague a season ago, where you hear the band playing the train rolling down the tracks and then everybody's cheering. But I think Ohio State's offense will be fine.
And leading what you said about Arkansas State, I kind of want us to preview that, but first I wanted to mention there's some more news around Ohio State athletics. The number 8 ranked women's volleyball team is going to Atlanta starting tomorrow for the Georgia Tech Classic. They earned their first win of the season over number 3 Louisville, snapping Louisville's 24-game home winning streak, and it was the Buckeyes' first ever top 3 non-conference win in program history. Friday they'll face number 10 BYU, and then on Sunday they'll play number 5 Georgia Tech, the hosts. And then the men's and women's cross-country teams, coming off 2 wins for both the men's and women's team last week at Wright State, are going to Ann Arbor, Michigan to compete in the Big Ten preview. Keep an eye out on junior women's runner Addie Engel. She's finished first for the Buckeyes in her last 7 races, so expect her to lead the way once again. But now moving on to Arkansas State, obviously a lot of people expect this to just, there's not even a money line on this game. Not many people expect this game to be competitive. But Arkansas State did look pretty scrappy last week against Grambling, winning 58-3, like Jacob mentioned earlier. And Jacob, you wrote a preview on the Arkansas State game. What have you seen, just around your research, what have you seen from this Red Wolves team?
Yeah, it's always impressive to me when a team can either have a blowout or get the shutout defensively. And Arkansas State did that offensively last week. So win 58-3 is a statement win in itself. I know it may be an FCS opponent or whatnot, but you got to go out there and put it on the field. James Blackman, Arkansas State's redshirt senior quarterback, played at Florida State earlier in his career. Last week against Grambling, he goes out there, leads their offense. Individually, he completes 15 to 20 passes, goes for 210 yards, has 2 touchdowns himself. So he's someone who's competed in a Power 5 program, a program that expects success, moves on to Arkansas State and, puts up big numbers in the first game of Arkansas State season. So, for me, there's also some connections from Ohio State on the coaching staff there. I believe Arkansas State's defensive coordinator has some relation to Ohio State, legends in that regard. And then, of course, Arkansas State also used a little bit of the transfer portal to add on to some key contributors and pieces of their offense, defense, and all 3 phases of the game there.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned James Blackman. Not only throwing the ball, he can get it done on the ground as well. He had just 2 carries, but both of those were for touchdowns, 11 yards total on the ground. So my big question for Ohio State's defense going into the Notre Dame game was how are they going to contain Tyler Buckner's legs, and they did a pretty good job of that, pretty good job of the ground game overall, and that's going to have to come into handy this week because Arkansas State, they had 3 bills, guys, 3 bills, 339 yards, 6 touchdowns as a unit, dude. I mean, imagine if you had the Arkansas State, every single running back on your fantasy team, and because Johnny Lang, 13 carries, 128 yards and a touchdown, 9.5 yards a carry. A.J. Mayer, backup quarterback, he got into the game, 7 carries, 75 yards, 1 touchdown, 10.6 yards a carry. So Ohio State's defense that only allowed 76 yards on the ground, they're going to have to step up and really take Arkansas State's ground game out of it and force James Blackman, who had an impressive day, slinging it around the yard against Grambling. They're going to make him force him to make plays, and I think that'll also play into an advantage for Ohio State's offense scoring points as well because, like Ryan Day mentioned, Notre Dame, they were trying to run the ball, they were trying to limit possessions and eat up some of the clock. So now, if Arkansas State's throwing it around, the corners will really get tested. So that could get the ball back to Ohio State a little bit quicker and lead to more points for the Buckeyes.
Well, you talk about how Notre Dame was trying to control the tempo. Even when Ohio State had the ball after those long drives, they were trying to go hurry up here and there, speed up the process, see if they could find anybody. And I think that's one of the things that this game will have. Ryan Day can try to control the tempo. It's a noon start, so it's not, 7:30 in the shoe. Game day, all the stakes and everything that come along with playing a top 5 team in the opener. And looking right now at the live line, Arkansas State is a 44.5-point dog. So if they can control the run defensively and keep Arkansas State from keeping it closer than that, the Buckeyes should be in good shape.
Right, and you mentioned the one big thing to keep an eye on is, I'm not even saying this as a joke, is Arkansas State's defense for real, because they're third in the country right now in total defense, only allowing 102 yards. They let Grambling. Travion Henderson alone had 91. You tack on a 9-yard run. Mayan Williams probably had a couple of those on that last touchdown drive, and that's only 102 yards, and that's a span of 60 minutes in a football game. So, Ohio State shouldn't have any problems in this game, but I don't know if we can expect necessarily the blowout that Vegas is expecting.
Right. We've kind of looked over what Ohio State's brought to the table this early on in the season. We did this last week. I figure we should make this a weekly thing. I want to hear who you got for this game. I don't know if you guys want to give those score predictions, but I will. I will go Ohio State wins this game 51-10. So they do not cover. Arkansas State covers.
This is a lot of points. And so I'm thinking about that. But at the same time, I think Ohio State has a great opportunity for the offense to finally get into a rhythm. C.J. Stroud didn't find much of a rhythm in the first half and really a lot of the second half last game. I think this is a 58-17 Ohio State victory.
Even the line last week and all the predictions about, it might be a high-scoring game, Ohio State, Notre Dame, season opener, a lot of stakes, it didn't turn out quite like everyone expected. And I think that's going to be the case again this week. I'm getting major Tulsa vibes from last week, and if you recall, last year Tulsa kept it a one-possession game, going there pretty late there in the second half. Ohio State ultimately pulled away, but I think Arkansas State is talented enough to, give Ohio State a little bit of a scare early, perhaps come out with something different, just like Notre Dame did with that first play, even though Ohio State blitzed and perhaps, they adjusted and stuff like that. But, even still, Ohio State is Ohio State. The offense will still show up, even without or with Jackson Smith and Jigba. The defense should be able to perhaps rotate in some more players. I believe no true freshmen played at all. A lot of those position units, like the linebackers, defensive line, the secondary, played consistently the same players and things like that. I think we'll see some of Ohio State's new faces in this game, and perhaps they'll make a few plays. My call really showed out last week. I'm excited to see what he does again this week, and perhaps what could be his second straight start for his young career. It's his second year. But if I had to put a score on it, I'm going to go with 59-10. I think. It's even hard to see Arkansas State scoring a touchdown, but it's hard to say a team won't score a touchdown at any point. I do see Ohio State's offense, doing its thing. And, even though I may have said it didn't, I expect it to maybe not cover. I know my score prediction reflects that it will. But, I wouldn't be surprised if Arkansas State pulls off a little bit of a Tulsa and keeps things competitive.
Yeah, I mean, I can see what you're saying because all that's running through my mind is everybody – is doubting Ohio State's offense because they only won 21-10. That was against Notre Dame, number 5 team in the country. Our only basis for how Arkansas State is as a team is against FCS Grambling State. So I think talent will prevail. I think Arkansas State gets a touchdown late against Ohio State's backups and whatnot. But I still think just the Buckeyes' talent. I think C.J. Stroud will be able to do his thing. I think Travion Henderson I think he'll get the bulk of the carries this week with Mayan Williams later in the second half starting to get his. I could see both of them going for over 100 this week, 100 on the ground. But as for a score, I think Ohio State wins 56-13, so very close to that total. I think Arkansas State covers by, what would that be, 1.5? That's why I'm a journalism major, not a mathematician. But I think Ohio State still wins handily. The students go home in the third quarter, and I think Ohio State wins 56-13.
All right, they're on the record. We're on the record. Thank you all for listening to episode 2 of the Revamped Lantern Sports Podcast. For the sports desk, Jacob Benge, Casey Smith, and Gabe Burggraf, I'm Stephen Kishpaugh, and we'll see you in the next episode.